Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing great. Firstly, thank you for tuning in with Recro. Myself, Ankita. I work as a software developer at Swiggy and also a part of Recro. We have with us Naman Sancheti, who is a front end engineer too at Amazon, having worked at Morgan Stanley prior to that. He loves building accessible, performant, and responsive applications using the web stack. He's an avid contributor to the developer community in the form of talks, blogs, workshops, and code labs. Outside of work, he's a short distance runner and an avid reader as well. Naman, please take over from here.
Sure. Hey everyone, thanks for joining and thanks Ankita for the wonderful introduction. So yeah, excited to speak to you all about a topic that's close to my heart, and I also feel like not a lot of people know enough about the accessibility domain. So yeah, excited about it. So let me just start sharing my screen. So just give me a second. So I hope you're able to see the screen. Uh, Ankita, if you could please confirm.
Yes, Naman, your screen is
Cool.
visible.
So yeah, so let's start off. And yeah, just as a disclaimer, so the talk is in my personal capacity, which means whatever I'm going to present, it's my personal view or opinion. So it does not represent that of my current or previous employers. And similarly, I won't be able to answer questions pertaining related to the topic, yes, but not to the employers. Cool. So let's take a look at the outline for this session. So we'll start off with defining what is accessibility. Then we look at why that matters. We look at some of the assistive technologies. Then we look into some of the code level, ways to things to keep in mind when you're developing applications. Then we look at some of the tools that are available, and then we look at how, as such, the scope of accessibility can be extended, and then finally we'll conclude with a few references. So in terms of the, you would have already noticed that I'm representing it as A11y. So this is known as it's one of the numeronyms, which means there's a number in between. So the number represents the letters in between A and Y. So there are 11 characters or 11 letters between A and Y. Similarly, you'll see a few other numeronyms like internationalization and W3C and so on. So yeah, from here on, you'll see me refer to it as A11y or Ali as well, as some people call. So and yeah, I would be sharing so you'll find many of the slides have references and links. So I would be sharing the slides right at the end. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So in terms of defining accessibility, so let's look at the typically or in the traditional sense how it is being defined as. So it's more to do with ensuring your application is accessible by any person on the planet, irrespective of their cognitive, visual, auditory, motor, or speech-related disabilities or disorders. So yeah, so that's one thing to be mindful of. So typically we tend to think of visual and auditory and even motor, but we don't often think about cognitive and speech disorders as well. So yeah, so that's just something to be mindful of. So here, cognitive means someone who might have, let's say, dyslexia, or someone who might have attention deficit disorder, or it could be some other cognitive related issues. Visual is, well, I guess we all know visual, but again, here there is one which is to do with color blindness, which we will see in more in detail. So I'll not go over that right now. Auditory, I guess we all know about it well. Motor is, so even motor, we tend to think about moving physically, but it can even be, usage of arm or usage of mouse and so on. So yeah, that's something to think about. And then in terms of speech, so again, there could be someone who has trouble in terms of their accent, or like in terms of like stammering or something, right? So yeah, so you can have those as well. Now, coming to the another way to look at this, so most of us, we tend to think about accessibility, or other disorders, as something that's permanent, right? So it's like either you had it since you were born, or like you got it at some point, and you have it on a permanent basis. But it's interesting to know that it can actually also be even temporarily induced, or it can be situational based. So, for example, for a touch device, right, it could be that like I'm an amputee, so I only have one arm, so that's like a permanent disability. But I could even have like a fracture, and that could be a temporary, inability to use the device, and it could even be situational. That right now, like I'm a new parent, so yeah, I don't have the option to do so. Same for hearing. So we tend to think the permanent one, right, where someone is deaf. But what if you got an ear infection? So maybe for a few days you are not able to hear as well, or you're in a bar and there's loud music playing. So just because of the situation or the environment around you, you are not able to hear as well. Same for seeing, where rather than being blind, you might have either you've had some medical procedure like cataract. I mean, you had a cataract issue, or it could be that you have low vision, right? So the thing to note is it's not binary always. It's also can be something in between. And same thing with a distracted driver. So they might be perfectly all right, but they might just be distracted. And speaking, as I called out, it could be your accent, or you have a throat infection, and so on. So yeah, that's something to be mindful of. So why does this matter, right? So one reason is poor experience. So even though it could be that someone is able to access the application, they might still get a poor experience if it is not built with accessibility in mind. But two of the other sort of, this alone is like a good reason, but I feel the other two are like even stronger reasons. So one of them is the legal aspect. So I'll cover that in detail in the next slide. And the third one is missing out an entire segment of customers. So this is again, as again I'll cover this in detail, but you could be missing out on an entire segment of customers who are not even able to use your application. So that's a big reason to do this. So let's take a look at legal aspects in more detail. So there are multiple acts in different countries. So the famous ones being the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, which is in the US. Then there's the Equality Act in the UK. Even in India, we have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. And I've put Canada here as well. So there's a whole list on the W3C website, and there are like multiple countries who have this. So an interesting case here is which got covered in the media is someone in the US was not able to order on Domino's, and they were someone who was blind, and they were granted because of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Supreme Court like granted that lawsuit, and yeah, so this is one of the famous legal aspects. So coming to the customer part of it, so this is based off again the W3 website. So they have, so Y is Web Accessibility Initiative. So they have, I'm quoting some of these from there. I've put the references here. So the global market of people with disabilities is estimated to be over 1 billion people, with a spending power of more than $6 trillion. So that's huge, right? And another interesting thing here is, so you might say that, hey, uh, like, okay, I'll come to that. That's covered in the third one. So in countries with life expectancy of over 70 years of age, people spend 11.5% of their lifespan living with a disability. So the latter years, you would have users who would be living with some form of disability. Yeah, so that's why this is a whole segment which misses out if we don't have accessibility in mind. So let's take a look at some of the assistive technologies. So when it comes to blind users, we tend to have screen readers. So this, I think, many people would be aware of. But yeah, so screen readers are meant for mostly the blind and low vision. Yeah, mostly the blind users. Then you have braille displays. So what if you are deaf as well as blind, right? So in that case, there are braille displays. And if you're a low vision user, you might be using like a magnifier. And there are even people who have motor disorders, so they struggle to use the mouse or the keyboard. So they have, I mean, head trackers and like your gaze of your eye. So there are those sort of pointing devices. So based on where they move their head, and let's say they blink their eye, so blinking is a click, and if you look around, that's your cursor movement. So yeah, there's also switches. So this is again for motor impaired people. So switches is it's just like a switch, like on and off, and it's easier to for them to do that versus using the other input devices. There's also special keyboards with larger keys and lesser number of keys and so on, and even special keys which are meant only for assisting these users. And then there's operating system built-in support. So let me like switch to let me just yeah, go out of the slides and let me show you. So I'm on Mac OS. So let me just show you, for example, in Mac OS, if you go to the system preferences and if you search for accessibility, so you can see there's a bunch of options here. So voiceover is the screen reader. We'll come to that, but you can see you can invert colors and you can reduce motion. We will come to this. You can increase the contrast and so on. There's a bunch of these options, and these are built into your operating system, and this is there in all the operating systems. So yeah, so that is again meant to help out these users. So coming to screen reader landscape, so for Mac OS and iOS, we have VoiceOver, which is let me just like quickly show you how that works. So let's say I head to the yeah. So let's say this is the MDN Mozilla Developer Network website, or let's say let me open WebAIM because that's a good one of the sites with great accessibility. And let me just enable VoiceOver. So you can see here, you'll not be able to hear the audio, I think, but you should be able to read what is being said by the screen reader. So you can see it reads out the links and you can navigate. Uh, so this is the button. So this is how like your screen reader navigation is. Now, let me show you one of the interesting features that screen readers provide, which is called a rotor. So what you need to do is, so maybe I'll not cover the keyboard shortcuts because that would vary, but in all the screen readers you have this rotor. So what that does is it lets you navigate a page based on, so let me start off from the links, right? So you can see I can directly get to all the links on the page. I can get to all the headings on the page. And here actually I see, so you see this is a level 1 heading and this is level 2 heading. So I think in JAWS and other screen readers, this is represented as a tree in a hierarchical manner. So that's where you're using the right level makes a difference. Here I see it's a flat list, but I can still see what level heading it is. I can go to form controls, landmarks. So this is something many folks might not know about. So you have these landmarks. So like main is one of the important ones. So I can directly go to the main section of a website without having to navigate and find my way around. I can go to articles and so on. So yeah, this is called the rotor. So it's interesting to see this. Let me go back to the slide. So yeah, in Windows you have Microsoft Narrator, which is a built-in one. You have NVDA, which is a free one, and then there's JAWS, which is a paid one. Same for Android, which has TalkBack. Linux has ORCA, and there's also a Chrome extension called ChromeVox, which you can run in Chrome. Okay, so let's come to developing accessible applications. Let me just quickly see in case there's anything. So we'll take questions at the end, but let me just quickly see if there's any like major sort of question which needs to be addressed?
Not yet, Yaman.
Okay,
Naman.
sure.
Yeah.
So let me get into yeah. So let's look at how do you go about developing accessible applications. So as I mentioned, why is the Web Accessibility Initiative? And this is something that started by W3, which is uh, so it's like a initiative under them. And so as part of this, they provide ARIA. So ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Application. So what it is it's a way to it's a way to develop accessible applications, and at a high level, it's comprised of roles. So roles are attributes which you can assign to your HTML elements, and those can be used to dictate the structure and the type of the page. For example, the landmarks I just showed you. So you can either use the main tag in HTML, which is semantic, so it will implicitly give you that, or you can have a custom element but give it the role main. So role equal to main, and that will drive the structure of the page. And same with type. So you can create like a custom button and you can give it a role equals button. So yeah. Then there are these ARIA hyphen, uh, the asterisk is for the regular expression. So anything which is having prefix ARIA hyphen. So that is used to dictate the state and to provide some supporting information. So it could be, let's say you have a checkbox. So you can give ARIA, and it's a custom checkbox, right? So it can be ARIA checked equals true or false. So that tells the screen reader that what state the checkbox is in. So if you use native controls, so if you use the native input type equals checkbox, you don't need to do this. You get it out of the box. But if you're developing like custom controls, then you need to make them accessible. Um, Same with supporting info. So you can have like an ARIA label tag. So if it's an icon, so let's say a close icon, so it's something visual. So for a screen reader user, I don't have the way to look at the icon. So you can give it a ARIA label, and it can be something like close button. And so when I navigate to that button using a screen reader, I will know what I'll still be able to use it. Live regions is for when you have dynamic areas on the page. So uh, it's so you load the page, and then let's say you're making some network call, and then so let's say the search page, and then you make a network call, and then after maybe 3 seconds you get the search result. So the search results need to be, so the user needs to be notified that hey, the results are now available. So if so, usually we are able to do notice this because we have like the visual ability, so we can just see that hey, the results are now loaded. But for a screen reader user, those need to be announced, right? So you can mark that region as a live region, which means the screen reader will watch that if there are any changes in terms of DOM operations happening in that region, then the screen reader will announce that change, so the user will get notified. And then finally, keyboard support. So I should be able to navigate around the web page using my keyboard. Yeah, so at a high level, that's what ARIA is. And there are three levels actually. So there are three levels of, compliance or conformance as they call it here. So level A is like the bare minimum, and you will see mostly double A or double A is the one which is you see is considered the one that at least you should conform to that, and then that's also the one which is used in most laws. And then triple A is the highest one, which is not often easy to achieve, but that's what we should strive for. So yeah, that's the highest one. So there are three levels. So let's take a look at some quick examples of what quick wins we can have, or what all we could do while we are writing our applications. So one of the simplest one is if you have an image on the page, you should add an alt attribute. So the good thing there is if I'm visually impaired, I can still get to know about the image, right? And one thing to know about here is the content that you put in the alt attribute. So that has to be tailored for what. So it should tell you what the implication of the image or what it's trying to convey versus just describing the image, right? So many times it's like we have an image and we're trying to convey something through the image. But for a screen reader user, if you start describing everything, it'll be too verbose. You need to write the content has to be right, and yeah, so that's something to keep in mind in terms of the alt attribute. For icons, as I mentioned, you can have the ARIA label, and so ARIA label is you specify the text value, and ARIA labeled by is where instead of directly giving the text value, you can just refer to another element. So you can just give the selector of another element on the page, and then you can just use that. So you don't need to duplicate your value or your text in both places. Rotor. So rotor I just showed you, and so this is driven by. So if you use semantic markup, so as I said, if you use the main tag, the main HTML tag versus writing your own custom element, so you get that out of the box. Same with the button. If you use a native button tag versus you create like a div, and then you make it behave like a button, so then you have to do all the hard work to make it work well from an accessibility standpoint. So yeah, always prefer to use semantic markup, which could be article tags, nav tags, header tags, and so on. Another important thing is, yeah, do not block zoom. So as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, if you have low vision users, they are going to want to do a zoom. They might even be using a magnifier. So yeah, in your head section, make sure like you're not blocking the zoom. So like you let the user scale your site, and you should design it in a way that it is scaling as per the zoom. So you should not like just fix on. So I think this I will also have in one of the other slides. But yeah, do not like block zoom. Focus outline, right? So let me just show you how this looks like in action. So if you see here, as I'm tabbing through, you can see this blue, what we call an outline around the elements, right? So yeah, so this is used by users who have motor disorders, meaning people who can't use a mouse to directly go and access any element. So they will rely on this. And interestingly, as I was just checking this, so if you see, let's say I go to the Recro site, so we have links here, and links by default, you can see I get the outline and they work well. But here we have this button, and which is the code me in button. But you can see, so I was in contact us, and that's the blue outline. And then here, at this point, I have no outline. And then if I go tab, I move here. So in this case, it's still okay because there's only one button which is in between, so it's still bad. So let me just inspect this, right? So if I go here, so you can see it's a native button tag. And if I just filter for outline, so, and let me just put this in focus. Yeah, so if you see this, it says when the button is focused, the outline should be 0. So by default, browsers add this outline around, buttons in to make it, accessible. But we often tend to disable this outline, and the reason for that is that it looks ugly for people who are using the mouse. So you can see right now, I mean, if I click, so I will get something like this, and visually it's not very good. So that has how it has been, and this is an example which sort of shows this problem. So luckily now we have a way to get around this. So there is a new pseudo class in CSS which is called focus visible. So what that does is that only if I focus the element using, let's say, the keyboard, only and only then it will apply the outline. Like, so I can target using this pseudo selector and apply the outline only then. So the good thing there is it's best for both. So as a mouse user, I would not get the outline, which is great for me. and if I'm on the keyboard, I still get this. So yeah, so something like this can solve for yeah. So that's on the focus outline. Coming to forms, so yeah, so forms as such, there's a lot do that can be done to make a great form in terms of making it a great experience. But in terms of just talking about the bare minimum that is required so that anyone is able to access your form to be even use it, even though the user experience might not be great. So you need to have labels. So why is that important? So if I'm, let's say, visually impaired, so it could be that so I've not really like, so you have many, like you can see here, right? So we have this search, and then we have this search box on the right. So visually you can see that, okay, this box is mapping to this search, right? But if I'm not having the visual capability, and if I'm just tabbing around, right? So I might just reach to this box and I have no context on what this box, input box, maps to, right? So that's where labels are important, because you need to say that, hey, this input box is labeled by this search, or I can give a hard coded, I mean, direct label as a string of search. So yeah, so that's where labels are very important. They're also important in the sense that if I have a label, I can also toggle the, I mean, if it's like a checkbox, I can just toggle it as well using the label. So yeah, so labels are something that's needed. Grouping. So grouping is important for people who have cognitive disorders. So if you have a form, you have a large number of fields, there's no grouping. And so yeah, in that case, again, someone might just get lost and they might just drop out. So yeah, so here we have this field set element, and I mean there are other techniques also. So you can do this grouping of elements, and yeah, that can help in addressing the cognitive part. And appropriate attributes. So what I mean by this is just in terms of if you have a numeric based field or a password based field, just having the right input types, and if it's like a checkbox, it should tell me that, hey, it's checked right now or not, right? So just in terms of applying the right attributes so that the form works well. Okay, so the next one is tab index. So tab index is it's used to dictate what elements can be accessed by the tab. So as I showed you that I was using the tab key here to navigate around the page, and anything that's not in this sequence, I am like not able to access it. So that's where tab index becomes important. So it can take three values. So and in fact, if you're using like a native element, right? Like a semantic element. So let's say a button. So buttons are focusable by default, right? So I do not need to specify tab index equals to 0 to make it focusable. But if it's like a custom button or some custom element which I want to be able to focus on, then I need to say tab index equals 0, and that will add it to the ordering in terms of the focus. So I'll be able to reach it. Yeah, so that's tab index 0, and the ordering is, so let's have two elements with tab index 0. So then it's based on their ordering in the DOM. So whatever is, so that's the default order that it goes by the DOM ordering. Uh, yeah, and if I have, so apart from 0, I can give it a value greater than 0. So greater than 0 is again, I'm able to reach the element, but it's like a override. So what you're saying is uh, so if I have a mix of these, right, some elements with the value 0 and some with the value as, let's say, 1, 2, and so on. So it's going to go first to the ones which are more than 0. And so that's why it's like a custom ordering. And interestingly, like for example, if you go to the MDN site, and I mean, you go to the tab index part, you will see that they flat out say that you should never be using tab index greater than 0. So yeah, so the reason there, it messes up the experience for screen reader users. and that's why what you should instead do is you should stick to 0. But if you need to check, like play with the ordering, you can use CSS to change the visual order. But for the screen reader, you keep it at the DOM based ordering. Yeah. And then the last one is -1. So -1 is I don't want an element to be focusable. So so I can give it -1. But one interesting thing here is this is only by keyboard. So what that means is if I'm using JavaScript, right, I can still focus the element. So it's only non-reachable by keyboard. So it's often used for off-screen elements. So you can, so let's say you have an error message on in a form. So when the user has entered an invalid input, you can programmatically set the focus to that error message, but I mean the error part, but yeah, I mean like as such it's off screen. So cool. Few other things that we can do is, yeah, one is using scalable units. So here you can use, for example, rems over pixels. So here the idea is that rem is it's going to be based on whatever is the font size set for your body. So if I have to use pixels, it's going to scale for your screen, pixel density, but not going to scale for the zoom. So if it's like 200 pixels, it's always going to be 200 pixels. Whereas with REM, it's percent like it's going to be relative, right? So it's going to scale. So that way, so this goes in hand with what I was saying at the beginning, that you don't disallow zoom for the users because it's critical for, let's say, a low vision user. Yeah, so that's where this comes in. Skip to main content. Yes, this I think I had shown this here, so you can see. Yeah, so right when I land on the page, I see this thing called skip to main content, and it takes me to the main landmark, right? So this is very standard across sites, and this is one of like the basic things that's required. So yeah, as a user, I can directly go to the main content. So yeah, that's something to have. Page landmarks, I called out, and like you can set all these landmarks on your page. Page title. So this is again one of the very basic things you can do, but if you don't do it, I will have no idea that what tab I'm on. It might just read the URL, but still it's not a good experience. So page title is a quick win. Touch target size. So yeah, this is I mean it's sort of in the usability space, but it can be an act like a blocker issue for someone who has motor issues. And so if I'm on a mobile device, so I've quoted from the Apple human interface guidelines, but as such you will find this elsewhere also. It's a very standard thing that your touch target size. So in this case, Apple recommends 44 pixels by 44 pixels for any interactive element, so that you can, let's say, use your thumb to tap on it or access it. Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. Then there is the videos, right? The multimedia content. So here, I think captions and subtitles is something we are all familiar with. Though here, as I called out in the beginning, you might feel that, hey, I am not, let's say, deaf, or I don't really need subtitles. But what if you are in an environment where it's noisy around you, right? So there you might just not be able to watch the video if there are no captions, right? Or it might even aid your if you have, let's say, I mean, you struggle to like understand the accent and so on. So then again, this can be very useful. And then there's something called audio description. So this is for visually impaired users. So this is where so let's say you're watching some content, some video, and there are two people who are walking on a road, right? So in the captions, it might just call out the dialogue that's happening between those two people. But the environment as a whole is something you can visually look at. So you can see there are two people, they're walking on a road, and so on. But if I'm visually impaired or if I have low vision, I might miss out or not notice that, right? So audio description is like a more verbose version where it will say something like two people walking on a road and having a discussion, and so it's something like that. So yeah, that's the link if you're interested in knowing more about it. Then comes modal or overlay elements. So here, so so in terms of the focus on the page, so when I'm tabbing around, so right now you can see it's going through the all the links in the entire page, right? But if I am opening a pop-up, so let me just see if there's any pop-up that it could bring up. Um, Okay, I guess I'll have to look around, but yeah, essentially, if you have like a pop-up, so then, so let's say it's like a exit pop-up, right? And it says, "Are you sure you want to exit?" And there are two buttons, OK and cancel, right? So when I'm tabbing around, the tab should or the focus should be restricted to only that pop-up. The reason is that when there's a pop-up on the page, usually it has an overlay or a backdrop, which means you're not able to access any of the other elements on the page. So until you close the pop-up and or like acknowledge it. So the same thing has to be done in terms of the screen reader users also. So the focus has to be trapped, as we said, within the pop-up. So yeah, so that's what's called a focus trap. And also, if I'm so let's say here it said close website, right? There was a button, and or let's say even this introduction to web accessibility, and clicking on this opens a pop-up. So when I close the pop-up, the focus should go back to this element, right? Because if it goes elsewhere, I'm lost as a screen reader user, right? I'll have to you can see the number of tabs it took me to get back here, right? So yeah, so that's where it's important that we restore the focus on the trigger element, the element which opened the pop-up in the first place. Cool. So the next one is infinite scroll. So infinite scroll is where so I'm assuming that you'd all be familiar with this pattern. If not, it's the pattern which is used on mostly in social media world, on let's say Twitter and Instagram, where you have a feed and as you scroll down, more and more content is loaded, and it's never ending, so it's infinite, right? So it keeps going on and on. So while this works well for people who do not have any disorders, uh, but it doesn't play well for a lot of other people, right? So, for example, if I'm a keyboard-only user, it can be really tough to navigate the page because I have to do a lot of keyboard presses. Whereas with the mouse, I just quickly scroll down. It can also introduce a lot of cognitive load. So here there's this study done and like a list of issues. It's very detailed actually. So this is by DQ Labs, which is famous. They do a lot of good stuff in the accessibility world. So yeah, so cognitive load is something which becomes a problem with infinite scroll because there's just too much content and you have to figure out where in the feed you are at the moment, right? Because it's infinite. Whereas, so the alternative pattern is pagination, and pagination is very good from an accessibility standpoint because, for example, there's limited cognitive load because I know that I'm looking at the let's say 10 elements, right? Let's say 21 to 30 elements is what I'm currently looking at, and I can quickly move around as well. So navigation is quite easy. And this is especially the case for people who are on switch device, right? So they're not able to use, so these are people who have motor disorders and they are not able to use the mouse. So if I'm on a switch, it can be, I mean, I think someone would probably just give up, right? Because it can be really tedious to navigate the page. And same with low vision users. So you might ask why. So that's because they tend to use magnifiers, and you can just imagine if you're using a magnifier and you're on an infinite scroll, it will not work well, right? So yeah, that's where it plays bad for them as well. And this is not even the comprehensive list of problems. So yeah, so that's why it's it's good if we can like explore alternative solutions than this. Media queries. Yeah, so this is quite interesting. So there are these three media. I mean, there are more, but these are some of the interesting ones. So these are CSS media queries, and what they do is, so till now you would have seen that we have this dark mode and light mode, which is there in the operating system. And on the websites we usually have to there's no way to figure out what the preference of the user is, so we do it manually. We give an option. So this is where, let me just go back to the accessibility part. And if you see here, right, in display, so you can see there's so I guess the color scheme part of it is in some other panel. I'm just trying to recall. That might not be in the accessibility world, because that's also more generic. That's more on the user experience part. But if you see the this part, the contrast, so that is the, if you need high contrast because you have, let's say, color related issues, or you need reduced motion. So reduced motion is quite interesting. So you might have even seen this in any of the gaming content or gaming console, or like some movies or shows. So if there are flashing lights, or there is a lot of heavy animation, so a lot of movement happening, so there are people for whom this can trigger seizures, like epileptic seizures, right? So that is where they might, in their operating system, say that I prefer to use reduced motion. And so what we can do with this media query is we can get to know the user's preference from what they're set on the OS. And this is quite nice, right? So you can give a great experience for everyone, and you can respect their choice. Yeah. And same with the color scheme. So if they set it on, let's say, dark mode, they get dark mode on your side by default, right? Which is like awesome experience for them. So live regions, I think we already covered this. This is just the how part. So the how part is, there is an ARIA live attribute which you need to add, and there are two politeness levels. So what if I triggered a search and the search results are being fetched, and I'm doing something else in parallel, and then the search results come in. So should they be announced right away? So should it like interrupt me? I mean, interrupt what I'm doing right now, or it should wait for me to finish what I'm doing right now and then come and tell me, hey, the search results are ready. So that's where the politeness comes in. So you can either be assertive or polite. So it's good idea to use polite unless you have a very good use case to be assertive. So if there's some very important operation that is critical for the user to look at right away, then you can go for assertive. Otherwise, it's good to go with polite. Okay, let's take a look at developer tools. So in Chrome developer tools, so this is quite interesting. So let's say I'm on the Mozilla Developer Network website, and I open Chrome Developer Tools, and I inspect, let's say, this paragraph, and I go to the color property, and you can see there's this color swatch. Let me see if I can increase the size. Yeah, so I click on this color swatch, and you can see it tells me that this is the color that you're using, and this is the contrast ratio, and these are the levels I was talking about. So double A says you need to have a ratio of 4.5 at minimum, and triple A says 7 at minimum. So what if, so right now it's passing, which is good, but what if I was to reduce this? You can see the ratio starts going down, and even visually you can see it's starting to get tougher to read it. So this is the ratio for foreground with respect to background, right? So this is nice. I can quickly see this ratio here itself in developer tools. But what's awesome, it even suggests what color you could use to fix it. So you could see I use a suggested color, and now it's passing the checks. Yeah, so that's quite nice. So this is one of the things you can do in developer tools. The other thing is this accessibility panel. So for this, let me go to uh, one second. Okay, let's just go to this, right? And you can, so this is in the elements tab. and I can go to the accessibility pane here, right? So it gives me a few things. So one is the accessibility tree. So what is that? So that is a subset of the DOM, right? So that is what the screen reader sees. So that will not contain things which are purely visual and so this is basically what your screen reader would see. So you can see some places it says generics, right? The reason is there's no accessibility information. It's probably just a div. You can see it's a div.hero. So a div means nothing to a screen reader, right? It's just generic element. So you can see here that, I mean, this is how the experience is broken here, right? For a screen reader user. It also tells you the ARIA attributes applied. So let me see if there's any ARIA. Yeah, so you can see this one, right? So there is this, yeah, this toggle hamburger button. You can see these are the ARIA attributes it has, that has pop-up true and label is show menu. And so these are the attributes on the element, and you can even have computed properties similar to styles. Like we have computed styles, so similar thing here. So yeah, so this is the accessibility panel, and like if I change some of these, you will see it will reflect. So if I remove, let's say, the IR label, and this is a hamburger menu, so you can see like here, like there's no label, and for a screen reader user, I mean, it's not going to work. Although it's a button, so it's still okay, but yeah, it's not the best it can be. Okay, so let me go back. Yeah, so there's also color blindness. So this is something that not a lot of us, know in great detail about. So there are mainly like four types. So the terms are, I mean, proteinopia, which is where you see less of red; deuteranopia, which is you see less of green; tritanopia is where you struggle to distinguish blue versus green or yellow versus violet; and then there's achromatopsia, which is where you don't see any colors at all, right? So here's the interesting thing. So I mean, reading about it is fine, but I guess that doesn't uh, like give us that level of understanding. So in developer tools, if you go to more tools and you go to the rendering panel, there is this thing called emulate vision deficiencies, right? And in fact, you can see these are the media queries I was talking about. So you can see reduced motion can be emulated also here just for testing, right? So if you just want to emulate, so let's say light or dark, yeah, so those are also there. But yeah, coming to this, so I can do blurred vision. So this is how someone who has low vision would see the website, right? And this makes us appreciate more, how the experience is for them. Let's say proteinopia, right? So proteinopia is where you see less of red, right? So you can see this is how it would look like to them. So this is, yeah, I mean, it's not 100% the way they would see it, but it's close to that. So it makes us, just gives us an idea of, how it would be for everyone. This is like with the other modes. So this is deuteranopia, and then there's tritanopia. So tritanopia, as I say, it's more of blue versus green. So if there's some blue on the page, in fact, you can see like I cannot see any blue at the moment, right? Yeah, so they struggle with the blue part, and then achromatopsia is like it's basically black and white, so I can see no colors at all, right? Yeah, so this is quite nice that we can emulate these and get to know how the experience is. So let me go back. Contrast ratio. Yeah, so there's something called high contrast. Let me just go to the page. So there's something called high contrast mode, which is provided by operating systems as well. But there's also this Chrome extension provided by the Chrome team itself, which is for high contrast. The link is in the slide. It's available on the Chrome web store. So if I enable this, and you can see here, I can say increase contrast. So now I will see the same site, the same content, but with more contrast. So yeah, so that's again quite useful and something you can test your application with. Cool. Then there's a storybook add-on. So if you're using storybook, so storybook is it's a way to have like a explorer for your components. I'll not cover it in depth, but yeah, you can see this is something like this is how it looks like. So you have a set of components here, and you can play around with them, and there's a bunch of other things. So one of the things that it has is the add-on. So it has multiple add-ons, and one of them is for accessibility. So yeah, so that's something that you can enable for your storybook if you are using it. Okay, there's CI/CD integration. So in your continuous integration, so there's Lighthouse, but there's also a version which you can run. So it's a package, and you can run it on your CI system, right? So yeah, it's provided by the Chrome team. Then there's Axe Core, which is by DQ Labs, the ones I was talking about earlier. The Axe Core is the de facto, base for all of the accessibility tools. I mean, the ones which analyze your code and also the rendered output and tell you what issues are there. So yeah, so this is the one accessibility engine, and there's a bunch of tools, including Lighthouse CI, which is using this under the hood. So there are means to consume it in different places, but all of them they are being driven by this one engine, which is Axe Core. So yeah, so that can be used directly as well, and you can have these plugins. So if you're using ESLint, you can enable it for your JSX. So if you're using React, you can enable this for your ESLint, and you will get it will analyze your code as you're writing it, and it will flag issues. But that's not enough because some things we cannot flag at the time of just by doing static analysis of your code. So you need to look at what is finally rendered in the browser. So that's where Axe Core React comes in. So there was another package earlier which is now deprecated, and now they also recommend moving on to Axe Core React. So that's if you're in the React world. But there are you can also have use it in other frameworks and even with vanilla JavaScript. And then there's Wave, and then there's bookmarklets. So I'll not go in details here, but I mean bookmarklets is it's a generic way of running code where you can just run some JavaScript on a page, and you don't need to install anything. So it's just a URL and it has some JS, inline JS, and yeah. So there's a bunch of accessibility related bookmarklets which you can also use. Okay, coming to scope of accessibility. So till now we have talked about it in the sense of irrespective of the kind of person or irrespective of the disorders I may have, I should still be able to access the website. But you could expand that scope. So that's a traditional sense, but we could say irrespective of my network, right? Or irrespective of the memory of my device, I should be able to use any application. So that's where PWAs or progressive web apps come in, where they take care of the flaky network part. And in fact, they also tie into the next one, which is if I'm offline. So I have no network at all, and yet I should be able to use it. And for memory, we have light apps that are being done, and yeah, I mean those help address the low memory devices. It could even be irrespective of my device. So even if I am on a gaming console or an IoT device or something else that comes up, I should be able to use that application. It could be language. So I mean, there's no limit to this. Like I mean, there could be other parameters also, and we could say, irrespective of like my uh, what I am using, I should be able to use it. So yeah, that's where this could be thought of in a more broader manner. Yeah, cool. So yeah, some references. So WebAIM is the site I was showing you. So that is one of the best sites in terms of accessibility. So it's good to look at how it's done. This Alicast is by Rob Dodson from Google. So it's a set of tutorials on YouTube. So it's a playlist. So it's a short set of videos. You could refer to that. This one is quite interesting. So if you use the Night Owl theme on VS Code, which is by Sarah Drasner. So she has posted a blog about creating this theme on her CSS tricks post. So the interesting bit here is her research that she did in terms of figuring out the color palette. So what colors to use for the theme, and that talks a lot about color blindness and contrast and what colors work best. So yeah, it's a great read. So you could, if you're interested, you could look at that. Then there are a few other resources from DQ Labs and Digital Accessibility. And yeah, this one is interesting. So let me just open this. So this is where you can look at for any given type of widget or element you're creating, right? So let's say you're creating a checkbox. So what are the roles that are expected out of a checkbox element, right? So you can, or what are the keyboard interactions that are expected? So you can see here it says the space key should be able to activate the checkbox, or the ARIA checked attribute is what should be present on a, which is what will define the state of a checkbox. So yeah, this is a great resource, and you can even see some sample implementations of this, right? So yeah, this is great, and there's a bunch of you can create everything from grids to something as simple as a custom button, tabs, and whatnot. So, but to make it accessible is where the challenge is. So this can be a great resource to learn about what needs to be done. Okay, so before we close, couple of tips. Yeah, one is wrong ARIA usage is worse than no ARIA. So yeah, I mean, at times the browser will do default handling in terms of making it accessible, but if you explicitly handle it by, giving like a label, so it can actually be a worse experience if you don't use it right. So as I said, like you can have an I mean, image one is not a great example, but yeah, you'll find there are multiple cases where if you override and give the bad content, it can be worse than what the browser gives you by default. So yeah, just be mindful of this, and you can test out how it's working yourself, and once you've developed it and implemented it, and you can see how it is. And yeah, ARIA label, which is an attribute. So there are people who, so let's say you developed your site only in English, right? And someone is using, let's say, Google Translate or some translation mechanism, and then they access it using a screen reader. So the ARIA labels, uh, uh, so this varies from browser to browser, but overall it's not very well supported. So it could be that your ARIA label stays in English, even though I might be using in German, right? So if possible, yeah, you can, you know, do this preference to the give this preference to the user and accordingly generate the ARIA label. But if that's not an option, then at least you can add a visually hidden element instead of giving an ARIA label. So the good thing there is, if it's an element, the translation will take care of it, and so that way it will work fine. So yeah, so that's something that can be useful. So yeah, that's all, folks. This is the link for the slides, so you can access it at this short URL. That's my Twitter handle, and if you want to know more about me, that's where you can find me on the web. So that links to all of the other. Yeah, you can get all the details there. So are there any questions?
I think Naman, your slides, your like way of explaining everything was so good enough that I don't feel like anyone has any queries as of yet. But as we'll be sharing the slides, the presentation link with everyone, and
Okay.
they'll have.
So it should be already accessible actually. Let me just bring it up again. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Could you
the
please
link.
share the
So
link in the
it should
chat?
already be available.
I don't think anyone has any questions right now. So I'll request everyone to connect with Naman directly or me or with Tarun if you have any queries related to the topic or any the presentation link or any resource that you want us to share. And thank you so much, Naman, for the great session today.
Sure. Thanks for the
Yeah,
opportunity.
hope to see
Yeah,
you soon in the
happy to.
upcoming sessions.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Bye.